Have you ever wondered why some people spend thousands of dollars every year trying to live longer while a 101-year-old woman quietly cooks the same breakfast she's eaten since Franklin Roosevelt was president? Before you believe another headline telling you which food is going to kill you this week, let me tell you something. I have outlived 3 family doctors, not 1, not 2, 3. The last one was a kind gentleman. Very intelligent, always wore polished shoes. About 30 years ago, he looked over his glasses and said, "Mrs. Carter, if you keep frying eggs in butter every morning, your heart won't forgive you." I smiled. I thanked him. Then I went home and fried 2 eggs in butter the very next morning. Last autumn, my granddaughter drove me to attend his funeral. Life has a peculiar sense of humor. My name is Evelyn Grace Carter. I turned 101 years old this February. I still live in my own little white house. I still water the roses Richard planted almost 60 years ago. I still read without needing large print books. Most mornings I wake before the sun. I make my own breakfast. I sweep my own porch. And unless my knees are feeling especially opinionated, I still walk to the mailbox every afternoon. People keep asking me the same question. "Grandma Evelyn, what's your secret?" They expect me to whisper the name of some miracle vitamin, some expensive powder, some longevity capsule that arrives in shiny bottles every month. I'm afraid I'll disappoint them, because my answer has never changed. I simply kept eating real food. The same simple meals that carried my family through wars, through recessions, through heartbreak, through weddings, through funerals, through babies being born, and old friends quietly leaving this world. Today I want to share those 5 meals with you, not because they're magical, not because they guarantee you'll reach 100, nothing can promise that, but because these meals taught me something much greater than how to live longer. They taught me how to live well. You see, when you've lived for more than a century, you begin realizing that memory has its own flavor. Every meal becomes a doorway, one bite, and suddenly you're 8 years old again. Your mother is humming beside the stove. Your father is wiping coal dust from his boots. The radio is playing softly in the next room. For one impossible moment, everyone comes home again. That, my dear, is nourishment no laboratory has ever managed to bottle. So, let's begin with the meal that always starts arguments. Number 1. Eggs fried in butter. If the internet had existed in the 1950s, I'm certain someone would have declared eggs dangerous back then, too. Every generation seems convinced they've finally discovered the one ordinary food responsible for every disease known to mankind. I've watched butter become the villain, then the hero, then suspicious again, and now respectable once more. I've stopped trying to keep score, because while experts change their minds, my breakfast never changed. 2 eggs, real butter, a pinch of salt, fresh black pepper. That's been my morning for over 80 years. Not margarine, not cooking spray, not fat-free substitutes pretending to be food. Butter. Real butter. When I was 19, my mother taught me something that never left me. She handed me a cast-iron skillet and said, "Never rush butter." I didn't understand. I thought she meant cooking. Years later, I realized she meant life. Butter tells you when it's ready. It melts slowly. It foams. It grows quiet. Only then do the eggs belong in the pan. People today rush everything. Meals, conversations, marriage, even rest. But some things only become beautiful when you allow them enough time. Richard understood that. My husband believed breakfast deserved respect. Every morning he'd sit at the kitchen table reading the newspaper while I cooked. He wasn't talking much. Neither was I. Sometimes we'd spend 20 minutes together without saying 10 words. Young couples might think that's boring. I call it intimacy. Silence isn't empty when you're sitting beside someone who makes you feel safe. Those breakfasts lasted almost 63 years. Now, the chair across from mine is empty. Some mornings I still catch myself looking up, expecting to hear him ask, "Eggs ready yet, Evie?" Grief is peculiar. It doesn't always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes it arrives while the butter melts. I remember when eggs first became public enemy number one. A neighbor named Gloria came knocking on my door carrying a newspaper. "Evelyn!" she shouted. "They've proven egg yolks are terrible for your heart." I looked down at the eggs cooling on my plate. Then I looked back at Gloria. I asked, "Did your grandmother eat eggs?" She said, "Every morning." "How old was she when she passed?" 96, I nodded. "So perhaps I'll take my chances." We both laughed. Years passed. Gloria switched to powdered breakfast shakes. Low-fat everything, artificial sweeteners. I kept eating eggs, not because I was stubborn, because I trusted food my great-grandmother would recognize more than products invented by marketing departments. I've seen food become chemistry. Labels so complicated you need reading glasses just to understand breakfast. When food requires a paragraph to explain, I begin wondering whether it stopped being food somewhere along the journey. An egg never needed advertising. It already knew what it was. Think about that for a moment. Inside one small shell, nature placed everything needed to begin an entirely new life. Protein, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, everything carefully packaged without factories, without preservatives, without television commercials. And somehow, we convinced ourselves the yolk was the dangerous part. Life often works that way. We throw away the richest parts because someone frightened us, not only with food, with relationships, with dreams, with growing older. Fear is an expensive diet. I've never had much appetite for it. During Richard's final illness, his appetite disappeared. Most meals came back untouched. But eggs? He still wanted eggs. Every morning, soft yolks, a little butter, one slice of toast. He'd take a bite, smile at me, then whisper, "Still the best breakfast you've ever made." The funny thing was, I hadn't changed the recipe in 60 years. What changed was how precious those mornings became. If I could trade every fancy meal I've ever eaten for one more quiet breakfast across from him, I'd make that trade before you finished reading this sentence. That's something young people rarely understand. Ordinary mornings become extraordinary only after they're gone. So if you're lucky enough to have someone sitting across your breakfast table tomorrow, don't hurry through it. The dishes can wait, the emails can wait, even the world can wait, because one day you'll realize breakfast was never just breakfast. It was your life, happening quietly, one morning at a time. Now let me tell you about the second meal. If eggs taught me how to begin a day, pinto beans taught me how to survive an entire life. Funny thing is, nobody bragged about beans when I was growing up. Nobody invited the neighbors over saying, "Come taste our famous pinto beans." Beans weren't glamorous. They were what families cooked when there wasn't much else. My mother made them every Wednesday, almost without fail. Not because Wednesday was special, because by Wednesday, whatever money we had left from my father's paycheck had begun looking mighty thin. She'd wash those dry beans in a metal bowl, running her fingers through them to pick out little stones. I can still hear that sound. Beans clicking against enamel, water splashing, the old kitchen clock ticking louder than it really was. Those are the sounds childhood leaves behind. Not the expensive vacations, not the Christmas presents, The little sounds that meant someone was taking care of you. Mother never measured anything. She added onions, a little garlic if we had some, a small piece of salt pork, sometimes smoked ham hock when times were good. Most weeks, just enough fat to make the broth taste like hope. Then she'd leave the pot alone for hours. No rushing, no stirring every 5 minutes. Just patience. I've noticed something after living 101 years. Almost everything worth having takes longer than people want to wait. Friendships, marriages, gardens, children, good soup, good beans, strong bodies. None of them happen overnight. Yet today's world promises everything by tomorrow morning. Instant food, instant success, instant happiness. I've lived long enough to know that's mostly advertising. Life doesn't work that way. I remember one winter evening in 1943, there had been a terrible snowstorm. The roads disappeared beneath white drifts taller than my little brother. The electricity failed just before sunset. Our house became quiet, except for the crackling wood stove. Mother moved the bean pot closer to the fire. She smiled. "Well," she said, "looks like supper's already halfway done." No panic, no complaining. She simply worked with what she had. That lesson fed me far longer than the beans ever did. Life isn't about controlling every storm. It's about knowing what to keep simmering while the wind blows outside. I wish more young people understood that. Years later, after Richard and I were married, money was tight again. He had started a small repair business. Some months were wonderful, some months, not so much. One Thursday evening, he came home carrying an envelope. He laid it on the kitchen table. Didn't even sit down, just stared at it. "We're behind," he whispered. I didn't ask how much. I didn't need numbers. I already knew by the look on his face. So I walked into the kitchen, started chopping onions, rinsed the beans, lit the stove. He finally asked, "You're making beans?" I smiled. I've never known beans to make a problem worse. He laughed, not because things were funny, because sometimes laughter is simply the first deep breath after fear. We ate quietly that night. The bills were still waiting the next morning, but somehow they looked smaller. Funny how a warm meal can shrink worries without paying a single dollar toward them. Doctors talk about protein now. Fiber, blood sugar, gut bacteria. Wonderful. I'm glad science keeps learning. But country women understood something long before laboratories confirmed it. Beans keep you going, not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. They're humble enough to remind you that you don't need luxury every day to feel satisfied. Some of the happiest conversations I ever had happened over bowls of beans and slices of warm cornbread. No fancy tablecloth, no expensive wine, just family. That's the ingredient nobody sells in grocery stores. My grandson asked me recently, "Grandma, what's your favorite restaurant?" I told him, "Your dining room." He laughed, thought I was joking. I wasn't. The best meals I've ever eaten weren't about recipes. They were about people. Food tastes different when someone loves you enough to make it. Science may eventually explain that, but grandmothers never needed research papers to know it. Now here's something I still do every single week. Wednesday afternoon, I soak the beans. Thursday morning, they go into the pot. Even now, at 101. Could I buy canned beans? Of course. Would it save time? Certainly. But I've reached an age where I understand something younger people often forget. Sometimes saving time costs too much. Because what are you doing with all that saved time? Scrolling? Worrying? Watching strangers argue on the internet? I'd rather listen to beans bubbling on the stove. At least they become something nourishing. Now, Before I tell you about the third meal, I need to tell you something much more important. Food never saved my life by itself. People think longevity comes from one magical ingredient. It doesn't. The meals mattered because they slowed life down enough for love to catch up. Every pot of beans meant someone sat at the table. Someone told a story. Someone forgave someone else. Someone laughed. Someone cried. The food was never separate from the life. It was the stage where life happened. If you're eating every meal alone in front of a glowing screen, I don't care how perfect your nutrition is, you're missing something no vitamin can replace, which brings me to the third meal, potato soup. If beans carried us through ordinary weeks, potato soup carried us through extraordinary sorrow. Every family has a comfort food. Ours came in a heavy pot with steam fogging every kitchen window. Potatoes, butter, milk, onion, salt, black pepper, nothing fashionable, nothing expensive. Yet somehow it could quiet a room full of worried people. I made potato soup the day my oldest daughter left for college. She was the first woman in our family to attend university. I was proud beyond words. But after her car disappeared around the corner, I walked back into an empty house that suddenly felt much too large. So I peeled potatoes, one after another, not because I was hungry, because my hands needed something useful to do while my heart caught up. Sometimes cooking isn't about feeding the stomach. It's about giving grief somewhere gentle to sit. Then there was the autumn Richard underwent heart surgery. Longest day of my life. Hospitals are strange places. They smell clean, but they rarely feel peaceful. When the surgeon finally came out, he smiled before he spoke. That's when I knew everything would be all right. I drove home exhausted, walked straight into the kitchen, made potato soup. Not because Richard could eat it yet. He couldn't, but because I needed the house to smell like hope before he came home. A week later, he sat at our kitchen table, still pale, still weak. He lifted one spoonful, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Tastes like home." After 60 years of marriage, sometimes that's the greatest compliment left. People often ask me, "Evelyn, what's the secret to living past 100? They expect me to mention antioxidants, or supplements, or some berry from a mountain nobody can pronounce. Instead, I tell them this: learn how to make one good pot of potato soup. Not because soup creates longevity, because the kind of person who patiently stirs soup, who feeds neighbors, who welcomes family home, who believes ordinary meals matter, is often building the kind of life worth growing old inside. And I believe that's a much bigger secret than potatoes. Now we come to the fourth meal. And if I'm being truthful, this one may be the closest thing my family ever had to a tradition you could set your watch by. Sunday stewed chicken, not fried chicken from a bucket, not frozen chicken strips, not something wrapped in plastic with instructions printed on the back. I'm talking about a whole chicken, the kind you wash, season with your own hands, and place gently into a heavy pot with onions, carrots, celery, and whatever vegetables happen to be growing in the garden that week. Every Sunday, for as long as I can remember. When I was a little girl, I never needed a calendar. The smell told me it was Sunday. You'd wake up to quiet, church clothes hanging on the bedroom door, my father polishing his shoes, my mother already in the kitchen before sunrise. The chicken would barely be bubbling, slow enough that the broth stayed clear, slow enough that the whole house filled with a smell no candle company has ever managed to imitate. Even now, at 101, if I close my eyes long enough, I can still hear my mother's wooden spoon tapping the edge of that old pot. Some sounds never leave you. After Richard and I married, we started the same tradition. Not because someone told us we had to, because traditions become anchors. When the world changes, the anchors keep you from drifting away. We didn't have much money in those early years. One chicken had to stretch, and somehow it always did. Sunday afternoon was the stew. Monday became chicken over rice. Tuesday meant sandwiches. Wednesday, if there was anything left at all, I put the bones back into the pot, covered them with water, added onion peels, a carrot, maybe a celery stalk. Then I let everything simmer for hours. The broth turned golden, rich enough that when it cooled overnight, it became jelly. Some people threw that away. I never understood why. That little wobble meant goodness. It meant the bones had given everything they had. There's something beautiful about that, giving everything you have, even after people think there's nothing left. I hope I've lived my own life that way. People often ask whether growing older scares me. Not anymore. When I was 50, yes. When I was 60, a little. At 70, I stopped counting. You realize something after enough birthdays. Aging isn't your enemy. Loneliness is. Bitterness is. Constant stress is. Living as though every day is an emergency. That's what wears people down. The body can survive many hardships. The heart struggles more with hurry than hardship. I truly believe that. Richard used to sit at the kitchen table every Sunday morning, coffee in one hand, newspaper in the other. He wasn't helping. He'd admit that himself. Sometimes I'd tease him. "You planning on reading that paper all morning?" He'd grin without looking up. Someone has to supervise. I rolled my eyes every single time. Back then. I thought those mornings would last forever. Funny, isn't it? Forever always ends much sooner than we imagine. If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't wait for extraordinary memories. Pay attention to the ordinary ones, because someday, those ordinary mornings become the ones you miss most. Now, before I tell you about the fifth meal, I want to ask you something. When was the last time your family sat together without phones, without television, without somebody rushing off 5 minutes later? Take your time answering. Because I honestly can't remember the last truly great meal I had where everybody was in a hurry. Food deserves attention. People deserve even more. That brings me to the final meal, the simplest one. The one I almost left off this list because it seemed too ordinary. Cornbread. Sometimes the simplest things carry the greatest weight. Cornmeal, buttermilk, 1 egg, a little butter, a pinch of salt, a hot cast-iron skillet. That's all. No fancy ingredients, no expensive equipment, just honest food. But here's the secret. It isn't the recipe. It's the skillet. Mine belonged to my mother. Before that, it belonged to her mother. Nobody remembers where it came from before that. Maybe my great-grandmother carried it west in a wagon. Maybe someone gave it to her as a wedding gift. No one knows. I rather like that. Some things don't need complete histories to become priceless. That skillet has cooked thousands of meals. Thousands. Every biscuit, every cornbread, every Sunday chicken that started on the stovetop before moving into the oven, every family celebration, every meal after every funeral, every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas morning. People ask whether cast iron really makes food taste better. I always smile. The iron isn't the secret. The years are. Last Thanksgiving, my granddaughter Emily stood beside me. She said, "Grandma, I think it's time you taught me your cornbread." I looked at her. Really looked. Suddenly, I wasn't seeing a 30-year-old woman. I was seeing the little girl who used to stand on a chair so she could stir the batter. Time does funny things. It folds over itself. Yesterday and today begin looking almost the same. I handed her the bowl. No measuring cups today. She laughed. Then how will I know? You'll know, she frowned. I won't. I smiled. You will after you've made it 100 times. That's how most wisdom works. It can't be memorized, it has to be repeated. She mixed the batter, too slowly at first, then too fast. I stopped her. Listen. To what? The batter. She laughed again. Then she actually became quiet. After a moment, she smiled. I think I hear it. I nodded. Now you're cooking. Recipes tell you what to do. Experience teaches you when. There's a difference. One comes from books. The other comes from living. A few weeks later, she sent me a picture. Just one square of cornbread on a plate. Golden edges. Steam still rising. Underneath, she wrote, "It finally tasted like yours." I stared at that photograph for a long time. Not because of the cornbread, because I realized something had survived another generation. That's how families stay alive. Not only through names, through habits, through recipes, through stories told at kitchen tables, people spend a great deal of money searching for immortality. I've lived long enough to understand something different. You don't need to live forever. You simply need to leave something worth repeating. Maybe it's your soup, maybe it's your laugh, maybe it's the way you always remembered birthdays, maybe it's the habit of calling your children every Sunday. Those things outlive us, far longer than we imagine. I've watched the world change in ways my younger self could never have believed. I've seen horses disappear from city streets. I've watched televisions arrive, then computers, then tiny phones that somehow contain the whole world. I've watched medicine accomplish miracles. I've watched airplanes become ordinary. I've watched people walk on the moon. Yet despite everything that has changed, people still need exactly what they always needed. A place to belong, someone to love, real food, honest conversation, purpose. Everything else is decoration. If you're wondering whether these 5 meals are magical, they aren't. Eggs didn't make me 101. Beans didn't either. Neither did potato soup, or chicken, or cornbread. What kept me alive was the life built around those meals. The slowing down, the gratitude, the laughter, the consistency, the people who gathered around the table. The food simply gave us a reason to gather. Never underestimate the power of a reason to gather. So here's what I'd like you to do this week. Not next month, not after things calm down. This week, cook one real meal. Invite someone, your spouse, your child, a neighbor, a friend you haven't spoken with in too long. Turn off the television. Leave the phones in another room. Sit together a little longer than feels necessary. Ask one extra question. Listen to the answer. You may never remember exactly what you ate, but 20 years from now, you might remember who was sitting across from you, and I promise you, that's the part you'll treasure. At 101 years old, I've learned that life rarely announces the moments that matter most. The greatest days often look completely ordinary while you're living them. A quiet breakfast, a pot of beans, a bowl of potato soup after someone comes home, chicken simmering on a peaceful Sunday, fresh cornbread cooling on an old cast-iron skillet. That's where my century lives. Not in grand adventures, not in extraordinary accomplishments, but in thousands of ordinary moments I almost overlooked. Now, I notice every one of them, and I hope, after today, you will too. Thank you for spending this little piece of your day with me. Take good care of yourself. Cook something simple. Share it with someone you love. And if your mother, your father, or someone who helped raise you is still alive, don't wait until tomorrow. Call them today. Some recipes can be passed down. Some conversations cannot. I'll see you again soon. Until then, God bless you, and don't forget the butter.